On today's World Inside, a former Japanese foreign minister, Fumio Kishida, set to be the next prime minister. With a sluggish economy in the shadow of the pandemic, what's on the ruling party leader's agenda? And as an ongoing forum digs deeper into the roots of world civilizations, a thought-provoking conversation over tea with a German devotee of Confucian philosophy in a gorgeous Beijing courtyard.
Here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Inside. I'm Tian Wei. We begin today's program with the latest on Japan's election. The ruling Liberal Democratic Party picked former top diplomat Fumio Kishida on Wednesday to be the next prime minister, succeeding Yoshihide Suga. In his acceptance speech, Kishida vowed to lead a transformed party in a general election due within weeks. He seeks to tame the COVID pandemic, which has battered Japan's economy. Japan is preparing to lift all epidemic emergency measures nationwide beginning Thursday. So how would Kishida likely shape Japan's domestic and foreign policies? Could he succeed where his predecessors fell short? Time to turn to our panelists from China and Japan. On the latest change of Japanese leadership, we have in Tokyo, Kato Yoshikazu, research fellow from the Rakuten Securities Economic Institute. Also in Tokyo, Naoyuki Yoshino, professor emeritus with Keio University. Last but not least in Beijing, Jia Daojiong, professor from the School of International Studies with Peking University. Gentlemen, great to see all of you. What does that change mean in terms of Japan's politics and future directions? Mr. Jia, your judgment from China.
Most of the analysis I've read say that the new prime minister is a long timer in the system, so he will be a force of stability or continuity of the policies. And Japan faces a lot of structural challenges that demands for continuity, but I don't really see drastic changes down the road.
Okay, yesterday, a new prime minister had the interview, and he was stressing the economic growth, recovery of economic growth, together with fair distribution of wealth. And that is a new direction for LDP members. I think Japan has suffered some kind of disparities in income after COVID-19.
I think the new prime minister is basically succeeding the previous administration because this is happening in LDP. In terms of Suga's legacy, he has to some extent lost some credibility or accountability from the public. So this is the main challenge for Kishida, and charisma matters, leadership matters. So this is not, I have not seen drastic change, but this is still very important election.
When it comes to economy, what are likely to be the policies? Professor Yoshino, during the campaign, does the new prime minister in any way revealed?
I think the new prime minister will continue the previous administration, and he is stressing the distribution of wealth and also subsidies for affected sectors, such as small and medium-sized businesses, restaurants, and so on. And that is a temporary good policy. However, it will accumulate government deficits. So his next agenda is how to cope with huge budget deficits together with the aging population. Pensions and social securities would be expected to increase more. So I think he has to tackle about much more seriously about the aging issues. And the most important thing for Japanese aging issues, and it was not discussed among LDP members, is to postpone retirement age to bring them back to working force rather than relying on pensions and social welfare. And that will be one of the policies that Japan has to follow.
Right.
Otherwise, accumulation of deficits will be continued.
Mr. Yoshikazu?
Yes, I completely agree with Professor Yoshino. And maybe, looking back to Abe's administration, the longest administration over constitutional history in Japan, actually he mentioned growth strategy. It's a very important, and, he opened up somehow for foreigners to boost the domestic consumption. And this is a challenge for Kishida as well, how to internationalize Japan's market, because now due to the coronavirus, now, basically no foreigner, tourists, comes in. But, after coronavirus or in a pandemic, how could Japan continuously succeed?
So it seems that Professor Zha, your two Japanese counterparts are suggesting there's a short-term policy likely to be implemented, and there's a lot of long-term vision that needs to be addressed. Your thoughts?
Well, for the past almost 20 years, or at least 10 years or so, in spite of the fairly frequent change of prime ministership, somebody counted that the past 20 years, Japan had 10 prime ministers. That does give the impression of instability of leadership. On the other hand, when you look at the economic policies of Japan, Japan more or less carved out its own approach to managing micro and macro, especially macroeconomics, including the debt. Earlier there was reference to deficits, and Japan successfully maintained its cutting edge in a lot of these areas of technological innovation. Earlier there was a mentioning of aging, the challenges of narrowing income gaps. In that regard, Japan is becoming a victim of its own success, precisely because of its success, internationally speaking, in comparison with many other societies. More and more people in the society feel that they are left out, that they are not getting a fair share of the pie. And similar sentiments can be found in all societies here, including China.
Let's think about some of these issues. First of all, many in this part of the world are very concerned about the potential of China-Japan relations. Now, even though Japan is not joining what is called the AUKUS, which is the U.S. test for how many it could bring to its side, likely against China. What is the temperature in Japan, and what is the extent of Japan that would go in order to accommodate the U.S. Toward China?
I would like to talk about the economic side of the policy. I think Japan, China, Korea, Northeastern Asia are closely connected to each other by trade. And also in near future, capital flows may become much more active. I think economic relations has to be very tight altogether. And in northeast of China, lots of infrastructure investment will be needed. I think the economic growth will come from the population growth too. So China is very important to grow now before the China is facing with aging population. The next one is digital commerce will be becoming much more active.
Right.
I think that can contribute the trade among various sectors, including small businesses and agriculture.
But the question is, the economic side vis-a-vis the geopolitical and political side, how do you see which way is likely to win?
I think the economic aspects between China, Korea, Japan are very important. And the trade among three countries will benefit all of them. So I think we should focus on the economic side. And then some products are very difficult to negotiate. So we should start the easier products each other. And that is a way to proceed this trade debate.
Yeah.
And openness and capital flow, including capital flow.
We cannot hide from this question is, what does that mean, that balance between trade and economic ties and political and geopolitical ties? Professor Yoshino.
I think that political side is not so easy to complement because Japan is in between in US and China. But we could separate some of those political issues to the economic issues. And that is my own view.
Okay.
Rather than making them complicated each other.
Are you confident that the future prime minister will be able to do that?
I hope that the Prime Minister can do it economic issues and political issues a little bit separately so that the trade negotiations and free agreement could be proceeded.
Professor Jia, same question to you. China-Japan economic ties getting ever more actually exciting with the multilateral trading platforms. But what's ahead? How much will be under the shadow of politics and geopolitics?
With the CPTPP, there are some different opinions. I think that there was the expression of support, a welcome for Taiwan to application, and that's probably where your question comes from. But for China to apply to join the CPTPP, it's actually an endorsement of Japanese leadership after the U.S. left the original TPP. You have the United States, you have China, you have Europe, Japan, and now Australia is fully in the picture. But what I see is that in a strange way, probably that will turn out to be a plus for Northeast Asia is that the U.S. has actually created a division of labor. The more hard security part, for example, by offering Australia the American nuclear technologies for weapons, that takes care of the so-called high security.
How do you see the immediate prospect of politics and geopolitics by the upcoming Prime Minister during his time?
On security policies or political diplomacy with China, the new Prime Minister is going to very much go with the flow.
Meaning?
All those intentional things, for example, strengthening ties with Taiwan or providing military assistance to Taiwan, those things were said, were tested, but then, the response from the China, from the mainland, has also been clear. Japan will try to adjust and try to, quote unquote, not rock the boat. It will try to satisfy, the wishes of Washington, D.C., Beijing, or even Brussels, or Canberra for that matter, a little bit. But I think we need to understand that these sort of tensions are going to be structural. But a risk here is that some of the U.S. allies would probably be prodded, or if they volunteer to, quote unquote, be the deputy sheriff and do the so-called hard, dirty job in terms of escalating security tensions. That will be a challenge too. We'll see.
Will Tokyo do that job, quote unquote, Mr. Yoshikazu? Is that in Japan's interest?
Yeah, I would say our new Prime Minister continued to prioritize Japan-US alliance, but he knows how important its economic ties with China. So I think Mr. Kishida, at least he is a person who can talk, and he has some experiences to working with Chinese leaders and including foreign ministers. So I think Kishida continuously pursued Indo-Pacific. So he is not going to reject any action by the United States, even some situation to contain the right of China, but he is not going to reject or oppose publicly. But I think he knows how important Japan-China economic ties and even some strategic issues for Japan, and this is a matter of stability in the region. And when it comes to TPP, CPTPP, I think still engagement matters. We hope let China engage in the development and peace in this region. So in this sense, of course, like Professor Jia mentioned, now it's related with Taiwan issues, so it's a bit complicated. But for Japan, there is no choice except for engaging China and CPTPP, because China has been concerned and interested in TPP for a long time, not now, so for a long time, and now try to engage more proactively. So this is a very important challenge for new Prime Minister. How to balance the Japan alliance and the ties with China. But I would say Mr. Kishida is a moderate, balanced, and open-minded person. So, he at least he is willing to listen to others, including China. So let's see what's going on.
One of the things most people ask Professor Jia, just to respond to your Japanese counterpart, what will China's approach toward Japan as well? As we all know, it takes two to tango, and now probably even more players to tango. One could feed the others with excuses or with aspirations. How do you see China's approach to Japan under the rather complex circumstances?
I would think from the Chinese side, we have to recognize some fundamental changes in the Japanese polity. In other words, the war generation, the generation of Japanese leaders, elites that had direct experience of the war, including their families, that generation of leaders have left the scene. We're talking about almost 80 years after the war. The past 10 or 20 years of difficult relationships was driven in part by a gap here in China, emphasizing that, there was that war, and that's why China needs to be on guard. That's why Japan had to atone. But then on the other hand, the Japanese feel, well, that was something their ancestors did, and we should be moving on. But now by moving on, there is a new risk. You have a younger generation that have no direct experience or memories of the war, who come up with a lot of ideas that are quote unquote global or international, but these are sometimes intentionally confrontational. If I can be very straightforward, if you look at research findings, the whole idea of a quad, that's Japan, US, Australia, and India, this kind of formation, just, they don't really have a lot of economic commonality. So what's left is for Chinese and Japanese scholars and academics and policymakers to be aware of, say, the challenge of rhetoric, or should I say, so-called future-oriented thinking, and where they don't, hopefully, they do come back to some common sense.
Let's wrap it up our conversation with a final sentence or two from every one of you on the question of where Japan is going and what does that mean for Japan's choice in terms of its relationship with China. Professor Yoshino.
I think the new prime minister should have the balance between politics and economics. And we have a huge trade relations between China and Japan. And we can keep on the peace and stability in the region in politics, and also the strong ties in economic relations.
Including the relationship and balance between geopolitics and economy, our new prime minister should pursue what is Japan's strategy, what is Japan's independent strategy to sustain and ensure our long-term development. And this is the real challenge for not only our leaders, but us, Japan's public. This is quite important.
There has been too long for the two governments and, let's say, real think tanks on both sides not to be seriously talking to each other. It's not more than frank and open. It's to have a bit of, let's say, politics of empathy. That is to seriously take the other side's position into consideration and try to, rather than just repeating built-in positions that are domestically recognized as politically safe. I would think that's a real challenge, and hopefully the next prime minister, under his leadership, there will be more real contact between the two societies.
加道炯 Kato Yoshikatsu, Naoyuki Yoshino. Gentlemen, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for your analysis. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, as an ongoing forum in China digs deeper into the roots of world civilization, I had a thought-provoking conversation over tea with a German devotee of Confucian philosophy in a gorgeous Beijing courtyard. Wait for that. Keep it here on World Insight. Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The Nishan Forum on World Civilizations kicked off this week. Nishan, or Mount Ni in eastern China's Shandong province, is believed to be the birthplace of Confucius, who is synonymous with Chinese values and culture, at least in most people's eyes. The forum seeks to understand how the wisdom of ancient civilizations could shed light on building a community with a shared future for mankind. Learning a country's philosophy could be a great gateway of gaining deep understanding of its civilization. That's what David Bartosz told me when I was having tea with him and his friend in a traditional Chinese courtyard that he frequents in Beijing. The German scholar told me he learned from Chinese and German masters the big idea behind unity through differences. I love sitting there with him and his friend in that courtyard with piles of books around us, listening to chirping birds and watching restless cats purring by. I'm so glad to be in this courtyard. It's nice.
The best part about the courtyard is that you have fresh air all the time, and especially in the morning you have birds chirping, and you have cats running.
Right.
There's no uye here.
And we got great tea here.
Yeah. So you want some tea?
Of course.
Sure. Okay.
I thought you would offer, but you didn't. So you have a lot of wonderful stuff over here, huh?
Yeah. Mainly cultural heritage, intangible heritage.
Maybe in the future we need to do more about the Hutong culture.
Hutong Museum was my project. Colin Chinner.
Colin.
He had a sound terminal project. He recorded sound of Hutong twice in my courtyard already.
Here in this one?
Yeah.
Okay. So you got to know each other for a long time?
For about maybe 2 years?
Yeah,
2 years.
2 or 3 years.
Yes. We met from time to time also here. I've been invited by Xinyu to cultural gatherings. So sometimes there are friends here in the courtyard. It's very casual, relaxed, and we talk about Chinese culture, civilization, about all the topics.
Yeah, that's nice. And Xinyu even has your book. How good a friend is that?
Yes. This was my big study, comparative study on Wang Yaming and a German philosopher of the 15th century called Nicholas Cusanus.
So they are almost at the same time.
Almost at the same time. This is this is the most important thinker of the Ming Dynasty, and this is the most important thinker of the Renaissance.
I know that you gather together with many of your friends here for events related to Chinese traditional culture.
Exactly, friends, Chinese friends, but also foreign friends. We have met here on a regular basis, and we spoke about Chinese culture.
There's a revival, right?
Yes.
About
it's
curiosity and interests.
Amazing. It's
about,
amazing.
What is going on in Chinese
right.
traditional culture.
Right. It's amazing. It's kind of a. I think tradition is not just about repeating the old stuff, and what we see now, there's a kind of a merge or combination of a revival of the ancient elements of Chinese culture, but it's also combined or fused with futuristic outlooks, and I think this is the real meaning of tradition. So to carry on the cultural habits in a new form, to transform, and I think
like
this
that, particularly when I know that you had been researching about Wang Yangming, which is one of the most well-known figures in China's philosophy, particularly in Neo-Confucianism.
Right.
Tell me more, and our audience, about who this person is. Why is he so significant?
Okay, Wang Yangming is the most important, I would say, the most important pre-modern Chinese philosopher of the last 500 years, we might say. He's a Ming Dynasty thinker, very famous. He is very important for Chinese civilization, but we might even say for East Asian civilization as a whole, because he is a reformer in the Confucian tradition. He introduced new methods of self-cultivation, which became very, very important since he has introduced them. Self-cultivation,
he's been trying to link the mind and action.
Right.
but not in a very simple sense, but rather how these two would interact and eventually have one individual being quote-unquote self-cultivated.
Exactly. To me, I have to say first, I'm from Germany, and also Germany has a great philosophical culture, so I was always fascinated by the Chinese philosophical tradition, which spans, we could say, maybe 2,000, 3,000 years. And I have seen that there are a lot of touching points, and the idea in Chinese is 知行合一, so the unity of knowing and acting is very fascinating to me in particular because it adds something that is somehow a little bit lacking in the German tradition.
What is 知行合一, first of all?
First, I might have to explain what philosophy at its core, what philosophy is about. And I think philosophy is striving for an insight of that which runs through everything and which runs everything. And this is something that cannot be put into words easily. It's not enough just to understand the core principle of the world. It's also important to realize it in action, in everyday life, to translate this understanding into our daily habits. And this is actually what Wang Yaming's approach is about. So many other philosophers have explained the world a lot, or have tried to theorize. And Wang Yaming is putting the finger right to the problem that it's not enough to theorize it. We have to translate, so to speak, this understanding that we gain in philosophy into real life action, and to enlighten, so to speak, all our activities, all our relationships. And for Wang Yaming, it starts with the family. It starts with the relationship of parents and children.
One of the things it's very interesting about Wang Yaming, that is, he was in fact lying in a stone coffin for several days. And he was trying to self-cultivate as to what is important and what is he thinking, why is he thinking relevant to what he's likely to do. Tell me more about that.
This happened in Guizhou province, that event, what you were talking about in Chinese tradition, it's called Wu Dao. So we might say the enlightenment, the extreme full understanding of the core principle that philosophers are striving to understand. And what Wang Yaming understood in this context is that the subjective side of our existence, the Xin, the mind, the heart mind, and the overall principle of self-organization of the universe, which in Chinese term is called Lei, so the self-organizing principle, they share the same wellspring. They come from the same root. So our subjective experience as an I, as a certain human being, and the overall principle of self-organization, they are connected, they are inseparable. And we can, in our daily problems, in our quest for understanding, we can always turn to that principle, and we can gain answers from there in a sort of intuitive way.
In plain words, actually your action can be directed by the core values that you have at heart.
Exactly. You're born with, so to speak, a directionality which is present in your consciousness. It's always there. It's like Wang Yaming says, it doesn't matter if you look at the sky through a window or if you're in an open field. It's always the same sky.
It's intuitive.
It's intuitive, and you can always turn to that principle, which is also the connection between the so-called interior and the outer. Because actually, for Wang Yaming, the interior and the interior and the outer are connected. They are part of the same Xin, the same mind. So for Wang Yaming, there's nothing outside of this heart mind. It's the heart mind is a surface level where everything appears. You might compare it to a mirror. Usually we see things appearing in the mirror, but we do not recognize the surface itself. So, and the heart mind is the surface. It's an infinite surface.
In other words, he recognized that objects do not exist on their own. but rather objects exist with the reflection of our mind. Why philosophy is relevant to us today?
I think philosophy is tackling the big topics, the overview issues. I think that's the place of philosophy. And philosophy also provides at bottom or at the peak, so to speak, it provides a very fundamental insight which is shared in all great philosophies. At the same time, philosophy is also the reflection of cultural practices. So if I, as a German, I study Wang Yaming, it's a gateway for me to understand Chinese civilization, right? Because Wang Yaming, he was like a sponge. He absorbed several traditions, not just Confucianism. He absorbed Taoist, Buddhist, Mohist, so many legalist, many traditions. He absorbed that, and through studying Wang Yaming, it can be a starting point.
It's an entry point.
An entry point, and at the same time, it's also an entry point to the future, because also in the 20th century and the 21st century, Wang Yaming's thought has been very influential in China, also in politics. For example, Sun Yat-sen, he was very fond of Wang Yaming, and also many leaders after that always have read Wang Yaming's books. And also President Xi has emphasized the importance of Wang Yaming. So it is also important in terms of understanding modern China, and also to see the relevance of these traditions and how they are transformed into new understandings. And last not least, it's also a bridge, right, in East Asia, because, for example, Japanese culture and civilization has been very much influenced by Wang Yaming, right? So there's also a great opportunity for the communication between civilizations.
This is the reason why we talk about a philosophical issue,
Yes.
is because that we really need it today, as you just said. But to you, what kind of door did it open for you when you were in China?
Oh, it opened many doors, not just one. I started out as studying Wang Yaming from a comparative perspective. So I studied Wang Yaming against the background of German philosophy tradition. There were two doors. So because when you do comparative research, the most important thing is to look at the differences, the analytical differences. Right. So to understand both sides better, you have to distinguish the core aspects. So, and this comparison helped me to get closer to the horizon of Wang Yaming's philosophy and the way how it is really meant in the Chinese tradition, not to project my own backgrounds on these traditions. And on the other hand, it also, looking at Wang Yaming, then also helped me to see other things in my own tradition. So comparing, learning from both sides also helps you to preserve and understand better your own first backgrounds. And now I would say I have at least two backgrounds. And from there, of course, having two perspectives, two basic fundamental ways of seeing the world is much better than having just one opportunity to look at the world. And from there you can...
I love that. Tell me more about these two different fundamental ways of looking at the world.
Especially in the case of German philosophy and Chinese philosophy, it's not completely different. There are many touching points, as I said before. First of all, the great masters in the German tradition and masters in the Chinese tradition, they reach the same core level of understanding. We might call that the understanding of unity through difference.
I love that.
Right, in Chinese tradition you have He Ar Butong, for example, which is an expression of that, but it's much...
Shu Tu Tong Gui.
Exactly, and in a German tradition, Hegel, for example, he speaks about the unity of unity and difference. So core, or Fichte, he talks about the unity through difference, and the idea goes also back to ancient Greek philosophy, and it's also influenced by Chinese thinking, I guess, or there is a certain kind of resonance since also the Age of Enlightenment, because the founder, so to speak, of the modern philosophy tradition, German philosophy tradition, goes by the name of Christian Wolff. So a very important starting point after the 30 Years' War period. In the 18th century, beginning of the 18th century, was Christian Wolff. And this man, he turned to Confucian tradition. He was very much inspired by Chinese thinking, and therefore introduced some new thoughts that he came up with in the context with directing his thought to Chinese tradition. For example, he gave an inaugural lecture, I think in 1722 in the city of Halle, and talking about the Chinese Confucian principles of governance that early. So this is a very important moment for our tradition as well.
The debates regarding individual rights versus collective rights and responsibilities. This is reflected in the period of the pandemic, particularly about the masks, about the vaccines,
that's a very
all of this.
important topic, yeah.
And there seems to be some relevance in studying
Fundamental relevance, yes.
about what exactly is individuals' intuitiveness
Exactly.
vis-a-vis collectively the capabilities. How do you see that after studying Wang Yangming in comparison with some German philosophical traditions?
Oh, that's a very, very good question. I think there's a touching point between, for example, between Wang Yangming and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's talk about morality. There's a certain kind of very close relationship in this part of the two philosophies. And both thinkers, they have understood that actually the so-called other is actually a reflection of our own self. So Wang Yangming very much emphasizes that if we separate an I and a you, if we separate that in the mind, we are not in accord with the good knowing which we are born with. We are not in accord with the Tao. We are not in accord. We are not in balance. Our willing is, in Chinese, is 自私自利, so it's selfish. It becomes selfish. It's self-centered, and therefore we diminish ourselves. And the true way of developing our inborn moral capabilities is to understand that actually we are all expressions of the same core principle. At bottom, we are not separate. And Wang Yangming also emphasizes that our Xin forms one, we might translate it as body, one body with heaven, earth, and 10,000 things. So it's not just about, it's not even just about humans, it's also about animal ethics, so to speak. We could say it's also about protecting the environment. Wang Yangming speaks about the vulnerability of animals. We have to recognize them for being also the same carriers of cosmic life, plants, plant life, and even natural surroundings. As Leibniz said, we have to ignite one light at the other, right? The European tradition and the Chinese tradition, they have to ignite each other. And it's actually what they're doing for hundreds of years.
Yes.
They're already doing it, but we have to become more conscious of this process.
And be able to do that ourselves too.
Exactly, in our individual existence. I think that's the starting point. The investigation of our situations with people is the starting point to bring the world back into equilibrium. But for Wang Yangming, it has to start with us. So it cannot be
just one person.
Yeah, it cannot be introduced from above as a theoretical principle. It also has to come from our own selves, and we have to be enabled to study and to search for it. So that's why, for example, China, the poverty alleviation is so important, that if you're too poor, you don't have time or the opportunity to cultivate yourself. But if that problem is solved individually, the next step is to see the responsibility, not just for ourselves, but for the whole world, that we have to cultivate ourselves individually.
My conversation with a German philosopher. That's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching.